When I was 14 years old, I was living in the heart of San Fernando Valley with my parents and my younger other, 13 years old. We lived in a typical 3-bedroom tract home in the picture of suburbia. My parents decided to put the house up for sale and move to a bigger house, and that's when all hell broke loose. There's a space room attached to the garage that used to be painted all these psychedelic colors and bizarre symbols that we covered up with white paint. Soon after the house was listed on the market, we had some rain and my father noticed the ceiling in the shed was sagging from water damage, exposing the wooden beams underneath, so he tore it down. Strangely enough, lodged among the beams, we discovered a pair of binoculars, some commemorative coins from an Apollo space mission, and a cheap watch. Nothing of any particular value, except perhaps sentimental. But all of us felt a collective chill go down our spines as we wondered who these items belonged to, how they managed to get above the ceiling, and why anyone thought they were worth hiding. Soon after, my mom received her monthly bank statement in the mail and noticed a couple of checks that were not written by her, but someone had signed her name. Puzzled, she picked us up from school and asked us about it on the way home, but neither of us would ever forge a check, so she went to retrieve the check to show us, but both of them were missing from the stack. Pretty soon, all of our personal items began to disappear and reappear in the oddest places. At first we thought someone was playing a practical joke, or that one of us was responsible, and the accusations began to fly. But some of the events that took place were so mind-boggling, we became sure that no person could be responsible. One antidote. My mom and I came home after grocery shopping, and as we were unpacking the groceries, we discovered that a whole bunch of non-food items had disappeared, even though we specifically saw the checker bag them. By this time, we were used to this, and figured that these things would reappear in the middle of night in the oven or under the bed. My parents then went out to run errands for a couple of hours, and I settled myself to a long gab with my girlfriend. As I chattered, I idly opened and closed one of my desk drawers. It was completely empty, but when I closed it and opened it a second time, I saw a bottle of shampoo lying inside, the same bottle of shampoo that was missing from our groceries. I told my girlfriend what was going on and closed the drawer after removing the shampoo, bracing myself. I opened it again, and this time there was a tube of toothpaste. Astounded, I tore out the other 2 drawers and peered below the drawer, looking for any explanation of this phenomenon. Even stranger, my top drawer is a lockable drawer, so since it's closed, it's completely inaccessible from behind the desk or below. Wanting a witness to verify that I wasn't hallucinating, I called my brother in, and without explaining anything, I showed him the empty drawer and closed it. I opened it, and inside rested a 6-pack of Ivory soap. He freaked out and ran screaming out of the room. At this point, I was too excited to be frightened, so I continued to open and close the drawer, and sure enough, each time a new item appeared, sometimes 2. I even requested some specific items, like my nail polish or hair gel, to materialize, and it did. After every single missing item was retrieved, I stared at them all lining up in my desk in excited wonder, and then the awareness of what just happened hit me. I began to wonder if this thing, ghost, or whatever it is, can dematerialize and teletransport these items. There's no telling what else or who else it could be doing the same to next. Gathering up my hard-won toiletries, I joined my terrified brother on the front doorstep and waited for my parents to arrive. My girlfriend came running down the street to keep me company as well. This is just one of the many bizarre, implausible yet true events that my family and I have come to live with for the next 5 years. Certain things like cash were always missing no matter how closely you kept it against your body or how carefully you hid it. Important documents, term papers, school books always managed to disappear when you needed them most. This ghost was clearly present and knew what was most important to you and most inconvenient to steal. No matter how many times we moved, this presence made our lives miserable, but with each passing year, as my brother and I got older, the activity slowed down. By the time I left for college, there were only 2 incidents I can recall, and now that I'm married and 27 years old, nobody in my family has been affected. I could fill a book with all the things that happened, but if anybody out there can offer an explanation for a kleptomaniac ghost or has any similar experiences, I'd love to hear from you. Oh yeah, I've never heard or seen any physical manifestations other than things disappearing when I was looking the other way. Thanks for reading. So I'm sure you heard of the great witch city Salem, Massachusetts. If not, let me enlighten you. The witch trials of the late 1600s took place in Salem, Massachusetts, in part of what is now known as Danvers, Massachusetts. Due to the colorful history and the presence of many new age types, Wiccans, warlocks, etc., Salem has an abundance of strange and frightening stories to share. Here's one that I personally was involved in that took place in the summer of 2002 when I was 19 years old. One of the oldest cemeteries in Massachusetts and Salem's first cemetery, Old Burial Hill, is a tourist hub during the early fall months, but during late summer, it is empty except for passerbys and local kids, like ourselves. My best friend, her brother, their cousin and I had spent the day riding our bikes around, shoplifting, smoking cigarettes, and generally being a nuisance to the Bay State. We decided to cop a few 40-ounce and called it evening in the back of the graveyard. We had enough booze to give us a nice silly feeling, but not enough to cause visual hallucinations. There was no Navy rum involved in that evening, and none of us smoked pot. That was hippie crap. Dusk turned to dark, and we were cracking jokes, wrestling, and planning where to get more beer, when suddenly, the mood changed. Chris, my best friend's brother, began to tell us about a ghost that supposedly haunted the graveyard, and how his friend's sister cousin or someone like that had seen it last April. We were all spooked but didn't show it. Instead, we called his reliable source a wuss. Chris got annoyed and stormed off to take a leak. Me and Bianca and her cousin sat in silence, listening to Chris shuffle around. Suddenly, Chris came bolting from the corner of the graveyard. He jumped practically on top of us and sputtered out what was wrong. Jesus Christ, there's a dude, a frickin' dude. Yeah, so? Bianca scoffed. There are lots of dudes in Salem. No, in the tree, like hanging. Chris was visibly shaken and not generally an easily scared guy. Bianca looked at me, and Andrew looked at Bianca, and I looked at Chris. What? Chris began to crawl towards the tree he claimed the man was hanging in, and mentioned for us to follow. I don't know why he had to crawl, but we all followed suit. From where we sat, the tree was not really visible because a building was directly behind it, Roosevelt's Pub and Grill. Chris led us to the spot he had gone to relieve himself, and from this angle, the tree was silhouetted against the purplish sky above the harbor. It took me a second to register what I was seeing. There was something on the largest bottom branch swinging. The tree was huge and very old, and by itself scary, but now, sure enough, a figure swung very slightly. I didn't think it was a ghost, and turned to Bianca, who at this point, like her cousin, was frozen terrified with a free hand covering her mouth. Should we call the police? I hissed. Chris answered for her. We don't need the damn police for this man. And something told me he was right, and something told me we should definitely leave. None of us spoke, but we all booked it at once, ran to the iron gate, and went straight to Chris's and Bianca's house, dropping off the shocked and very silent Andrew at his house down the street. We didn't really talk about it for the rest of the night. Instead, we played Uno and crashed in front of the TV. The next day, we went back for our bikes and belongings we had ditched in fear the night before. Andrew's half 40-ounce was gone, and so was Bianca's bike. Gotta love the locals. The paper said nothing of a body. The graveyard was not the site of the witch hangings, and from what I have found out from asking around town, there's never been a reported suicide or hanging in that graveyard. The only known hanging site was Gallows Hill, where the innocent were hung during the trials. Gallows Hill is another whole story for another time, but until then, come visit the quaint and creepy town of Salem, Massachusetts, for history and some spooks later. My wife used to work for Oxford Suites in Hayden Island, just off of I-5. She had a complimentary stay as a new employee, so she thought it would be nice to let our son spend the night with Grandma, and we would have a nice night together alone. About 6 a.m., I was sleeping on my left side facing the alarm clock, and had a ringing sensation in my right ear that slowly turned into the whispered words, die, die, die. I couldn't move, and it was all I could do to even open my eyes. Finally, I was able to shake off the strange or bound feeling, and it stopped instantly. The experience only lasted a few seconds, but it was totally unnerving. I've had other experiences like this. I just learned from this website that it is called Old Hack. I never even knew anyone else who has experienced this. I was 22 years old at the time in 1997. I'm now almost 31. Thank you. Back in the summer of 1994, my family and 2 other families attended a dance competition in Santa Cruz, California. We rented a suite at a local hotel. The suite had one huge upstairs bedroom with a big jacuzzi tub. The downstairs had a living room and a kitchen. It had a large red iron stairway that led up to the bedroom. Together, with the other families, we had 6 children with us. 5 of the children were age 8 and 9, and my daughter was the youngest, age 4. From the minute I walked upstairs, a weird feeling came over me, a feeling of uneasiness. The children claimed the large bedroom upstairs as theirs, and they played up there the whole night. For many hours I stayed in the upstairs room with the children. I felt uncomfortable leaving my 4-year-old daughter up there because of this uneasy feeling I had, a feeling I could not explain. My husbands and friends told me I was being foolish and talked me into coming down and joining them. Several hours went by, and the children all had fallen asleep. There were 3 of us adults left awake, and we sat on the living room floor talking. We then heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They were extremely loud, and there was no doubt that one of the children had woken up and was coming downstairs. All 3 of us turned to see who it was. In the middle of the staircase stood a small girl, the same exact size as my daughter. I called to her by my daughter's name and asked her if she was okay, or if something was wrong. I then asked her if she had a bad dream. She didn't answer me as I said her name again, my daughter's name, and she disappeared. My friend and I both looked at each other in disbelief. We both saw the same thing. The 3rd adult heard the footsteps, but didn't pay attention after that. My friend and I both discovered her exactly the same way. A small girl with long curly hair, wearing an old-fashioned white nightgown. She was turned to the side where you could only see her profile, but you could see the sadness on her face. She was white or transparent in color. The time I was talking to her, I did not even realize that she was a ghost. She seemed so real, but as soon as she disappeared, I could not understand how I did not know she was a ghost while I was talking to her, because being white and transparent, she obviously did not look like a real person. It was a very scary, overwhelming feeling. I quickly woke up my husband and had him check the children. They were all sound asleep. I crawled deep into my sleeping bag, scared to death, and eventually fell asleep. The next day, I contacted the hotel to see if anyone had ever reported a ghost. The worker said he was new and didn't know anything, but he said that Santa Cruz is believed to have many ghosts. I've always been hesitant when telling this story because nobody truly believes me except my friend who also saw it. Most people just kind of laugh or respond with or wow. I've always believed in spirits, but never believed you could actually see them. Well, I'm a true believer now and will never forget this experience. I started doing paranormal investigating about 2.5 years ago and have had tremendous success thus far. I've always been interested in all paranormal avenues, but I never thought I'd be doing this one day. My 7th cemetery outing turned out to be one that I'll never forget. I went out to Forest Home Cemetery in my city of Fitfield, Wisconsin. It goes back to around 1850-ish and is centered in a wooded area, which makes it kind of intimidating to venture into at night. But being the persistent risk taker, I went anyway. I ended up bringing a good friend of mine along, just in case. We started out exploring the front of the cemetery and kind of copped a feel for our surroundings, making sure we were aware of the obstacles in our way, gravestones. After that, we headed out towards the middle of the cemetery, armed with only a camera and a flashlight. Though nothing happened yet, we were pretty nervous anyway, so we went over the entire cemetery taking pictures and hoping to see something strange. We didn't see anything strange that night, but something did happen that scared the hell out of us anyway. I was ready to call it quits for the night, but there was one more area we hadn't quite covered. Now, in this particular cemetery, I don't like going in the very back, not even during the daytime. It just gives me a strange, unwelcome feeling. But that night, for some reason, I thought it would be worth it. In retrospect, I wasn't sorry I did. Back to my friend that I brought with me. He asked if we should leave, and I said I thought we should check out the back of the cemetery before we go, and he agreed. So you can understand what we experienced, I'll try and describe what the back looks like. The cemetery itself is pretty big for a small town. There's probably around 1,000 people buried there, and it's set in the woods, as I mentioned before. In the very back there's a road, and on the other side of the road is a huge field. At about 100 to 150 feet into the field starts the tree line. So you would have the field to your left, and the road and the cemetery to your right, with the last row of stones right next to it, the road. As we made our way onto the road and walked down, maybe about 5 to 10 feet, all of a sudden, and I still can't fully explain it, there was a very loud growl that seemed to reverberate all around us. I must have jumped at least 3 feet into the air because I literally landed on my friend and just about knocked the flashlight out of his hand. Chris, my friend, had a total shock on his face as he studied the flashlight beam towards where the sound came from, and there was not a single thing, animal, or person to be seen, just eerie silence. We were stunned and dumbfounded. I managed to stammer out what the hell was that. Chris said he had no idea, but thought we better leave. We both wasted no time in leaving, but upon leaving, both of us were experiencing a tight feeling in our chests, and we both had trouble breathing. It was like being in a bear hug or something, very strange. Also, just before we left, after we had gotten back to the car, we took a tiny rest and gathered our thoughts. Chris had lit a cigarette, which technically is a no-no while ghost hunting, but we could really care less at that point. He took about 3 or 4 puffs of it and then threw it on the gravel road. For whatever reason, we both watched the cigarette fall to the ground, and as it hit, it started spinning and then abruptly stopped. Then, as if flipping off a light switch, the orange burning tip died out. We left that night with a lot to think about, and since then, I've gotten numerous pictures and EVPs from that cemetery and others as well. I'm not as scared of ghosts as I once was, and I consider them to be just like us, only a little different, obviously. I can't wait until summer gets here, and I can go back to doing what I love, hunting ghosts. Okay, this is kind of a long story. It happened when I was on vacation from Chicago, visiting my cousins in California. My cousins have a huge backyard and have a basketball court in it. They also have a tree house that is complete with electricity, TV, and a PlayStation. So me and one of my cousins named Danny were playing basketball. It was late, and it was beginning to get dark outside. But while we were playing, Danny's brother, Mike, was in the treehouse playing PlayStation. After we balled it up for a while, we heard Mike screaming at us through the treehouse window saying, "Damn it guys, stop shaking the fort." We simply looked at him in confusion because we were at least 30 yards away from him and didn't even touch the legs of the fort. We just continued our game until it became too dark to see. We noticed that Mike had left the fort, so we went in to play some video games. We played a game until we started to feel some shaking. We yelled at whoever was pushing it to stop. It instantly stopped and we continued. About 5 minutes later, it began shaking again. I went out with a flashlight and looked under and around, but saw nothing. I looked to the direction of the house, which was far because their backyard is so big, and saw that Mike and the rest of the family were in the living room. Kinda freaked, I climbed back up the ladder into the fort. We started playing a board game when we saw that the fort's security light went on, which meant that something was near. We briefly froze, staring at each other and both noticing the fear in each other's eyes. Danny went and peeked through the window but saw nothing, even with the help of the security light. I told him that it was probably some animal. He responded by telling me that the light only detects larger things, such as people. I told him to stop worrying, and we got back to our game. After a while, we got bored and decided to go back to his house. Danny got up and tried to open the door. It didn't even budge. "The stupid thing is jammed again," he said, as he pulled out a belt from behind the door. He must have had this problem before because he had a method of solving the problem. He wrapped the belt around the doorknob and began to pull as hard as he could. He looked so confused and frustrated and told me that it should be opening easily. I helped pull it, but still, it didn't even budge. It was as if someone was holding it from the outside. Sounds crazy, right? But it was then that we heard steps, as if someone was walking around the little porch of the fort. We both looked at each other and nearly broke down with fear. The first thing Danny did was pull out some powerful BB guns he had hidden under his bed. He then opened up a table for us to hide under. We were freaking out. Then I summoned the courage to peek out the window, and when I did, I saw nothing, but the steps continued, this time up and down the ladder of the fort. I nearly screamed. But being the optimistic and fun-loving guy that I am, I took advantage of the situation to scare Danny and joke around. I kept peeking out the window and screaming as if I saw nothing, just to freak Danny out. But then, he retaliated. He grabbed the string hanging down from the window curtains and tugged them as hard as he could, causing the curtains to go up, shooting up and exposing the whole window. We both sat under the table in fear, thinking of what to do. After a few minutes, the security light went on again. We sat in silence, watching the light that reflected through the window and onto the wall of the fort. That's when we heard footsteps coming up the ladder again. We drew our guns, thinking they could do something, and continued watching the light. A few seconds later, for a brief moment, a shadow passed through the light, sending a terrifying chill through our spines. We looked at each other blankly for seconds until I spoke, telling Danny that we have to get out of here. I slowly reached out from under the table and grabbed a string to close the curtains. Once I did, we got up and cleaned everything up so we could be ready to run like hell out the door. But the door still wouldn't open. I knew for sure that something was preventing us from opening it. I then got annoyed and my anger took over my fear. I began pounding on the door, screaming cuss words and saying, "Let us out." After my tantrum of screaming and swearing, the door simply slid open with a single pull. We ran out, shut the door, jumped down, and ran like madmen towards the house. It was later that night that my uncle, Danny's father, told us that the fort was built upon an ancient Indian burial ground. I knew whatever happened that night was for real. So that morning, once it was light out, we managed to force ourselves back into the fort. We began discussing whatever went on that night, and our paranoia caused us to keep looking out the little holes in the curtains. But when I looked, I saw nothing. I can't really explain what it was. It looked like a dark figure, or an orb, but it had the physical structure of a person, arms, legs, and hand. It was crouched down behind a skinny tree. I shot my head back and told him to look. He said he saw it, but then, when I looked again, it was gone. Whatever happened that night caused me to believe in supernatural spirits, and I will never forget it. Thanks for reading. This was around the summer of 1990. My best friend lived about 4 blocks away from where I lived, and I usually walked or rode my bike to his house when we hung out. We were pretty young and pretty wild, and we'd seen our fair share of weird stuff growing up. Long days and late nights of exploring the neighborhood and seeing what kind of trouble we could get into. Growing up in the city, there were some rough neighborhoods around, and I had a very specific route of back streets I took home each night. Still, I knew to always be on my guard and aware of my surroundings, just in case. One night, as I was walking home from my friend's house, I encountered something I could never have prepared for. It was well after midnight, probably closer to 2 a.m., when I was casually strolling down the middle of the street on my way home. There weren't really any cars on the road at that time, so I walked right down the center line of the street. As I said, even though it was quiet and I knew the neighborhood, I always kept my eyes and ears open for signs of trouble. Rival groups of kids who might want to claim the area as turf were always a concern. As I made my way down the road, I began to get the feeling that I wasn't alone. I resisted the urge to stop or even look around, choosing instead to keep walking at an even pace and listen for the sound of someone following me. Footsteps, clothes rustling, or breathing would give it away. I heard nothing, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being followed. I became more and more sure that someone was behind me, and my adrenaline started to build. I still resisted the urge to turn around and look back. If someone was following me looking for trouble, there was a good chance they would rush at me, and they would have the advantage. This was not my first rodeo, so I kept walking, but began bracing myself for a confrontation. Nothing happened. I turned a corner onto a new street and took a chance to quickly look over my shoulder. I was hoping to just see another random person out for a stroll, except there was no one behind me. Maybe they had gone into a house. I kept walking. Moments later, I felt it again. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my arms broke out in goosebumps. Someone was following me. I was absolutely sure of it, only now they were clearly trying to stay hidden. Every instinct I had, this was going to be a confrontation, and I braced myself for it. My fight or flight instincts were screaming as I continued walking, trying to appear calm. I felt it getting closer, and now, I thought I could hear movement in the distance behind me. Finally, I decided it was time to turn and confront my follower. I balled up my fist and quickly turned around, ready to act. Again, there was no one there. My eyes searched for signs of movement among the curbside trees and among the handful of cars parked along the street. Nothing moved around the cones of light being cast by the street lamps. Still, I knew someone or something was out there. I stood there for what seemed like forever, determined to wait out the hiding stalker. I couldn't believe they were staying hidden for so long without peeking out to see if I was still there. I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? After another minute of watching and waiting, I began to wonder if I imagined the whole thing. I was about to turn around and keep walking towards home. Then suddenly, about 50 feet away, I caught the shape of someone running out from behind a car and darting behind a tree. Again, my adrenaline surged, and I was caught between wanting to run for it and being frozen with panic. I kept my eyes fixed on the tree that the shadow ran to, waiting for him to make another move. Nothing happened. The tight knot of apprehension in my stomach began to melt and was replaced with anger. Who the heck was this guy screwing around with me in the middle of the night? Without thinking, I yelled out, "I know you're there, you coward! Step out and face me!" From behind the tree, what I can only describe as a vaguely human-shaped mass leaned out from behind the tree. Apart from its outline, it had no defined features except for a pair of glowing red eyes that flashed in the dim light of the street lamp. "What the hell?" I yelled, stumbling back a step, not understanding what I was seeing. The dark form stepped fully out from the shadow and took a step towards me. I don't know what came over me, but all of a sudden, I felt more angry than I ever had in my life. It was crazy. I had this sudden urge to fight, and as I looked at those dull, glowing red eyes coming towards me, all I felt was anger. I wanted to tear it apart. Still within the dim light under the tree, the dark figure took one more shambling step towards me, and I was overcome with rage. Unbelievably, I stepped forward and yelled out, "Come on," challenging it to fight me. But instead of coming closer, the dark form reared up slightly, and I swear if it had a mouth, I knew that mouth would be grinning at me. And then it vanished. It was just gone. The feeling of rage, it was gone as well, faded away. I stood there for several more minutes trying to understand what had just happened. Slowly, I finally turned around and began walking towards home again. Only this time, there was no sense of being followed. Nothing weird happened at all for the rest of the journey. Night after night, I walked that same path home, always wondering if that red-eyed entity would return, wondering if I would be confronted and experience that same crazy rush of anger. But it never came back. I've never told anyone this story because, well, who would believe it? Thanks for listening.
Ooh, happy Halloween. This is Phantom wishing you a very ghoulish trickery of Halloween and scares and frights. And if I talk like this, I sound more pathetic and weird. Welcome. Please subscribe, share, and comment on this video. I'm about to pass out because I feel lightheaded. Ugh.
Just kidding, guys, I'm back. But seriously, come on, share, like, comment, because it's Halloween soon, and we love the Halloween ghoulish trickery of the scare. Yeah, that's what we do. Yep, not really making any sense, but you know what? Does it really matter at this point? I think not. Anyway, guys, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next one because I love you. But I love the horrors, and I love the shares of the videos, and I love the comments, and I love the big hugs, the big virtual hugs I'll give to you. I love it all. So just let's just focus on that and do all that together so we can have a good dandy time. Thank you and good night. Bye-bye.